and welcome to TTG's latest debate, Can we rebuild as a more sustainable sector? I'm TTG's news editor Jennifer Morris, and today I'm joined by three industry leaders on sustainability for this responsible tourism themed debate, following the publication of a special edition of TTG. Our panellists are Carrie Harris, Head of Sustainability at British Airways, Clare Jenkinson, Head of Sustainability at Abta, and Derek Moore, Deputy Chair of Aito and founder of the Derek Moore Foundation. Clare, if we could perhaps start with you. I know obviously working for Abta, you do have a fairly wide industry oversight. I was just wondering to kind of give us a little bit of context to set the discussion off, if you could kind of talk through a little bit about what you think are the key areas of focus at the moment for the travel industry with regards to responsible tourism, which is obviously such a hugely wide-ranging topic.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, the triple bottom line of sustainability covers the environmental, the social, and the economic. And we've looked at this in terms of tourism, and we've broken it down into sort of four areas. So first, the environment, and particularly the urgent need to decarbonise to address climate change, but also waste and resource use. So that would include plastics and also water. Mm-hmm. The second area that we looked at is destination and community impact. So we need to ensure that tourism continues to deliver benefits for local communities, and that we preserve the culture and the nature that makes tourism special. And then the third area that we looked at was human rights. So this could be labour rights, child safeguarding, anti-discrimination, and then diversity and inclusion going further. So it's a broad range of human rights issues. And finally, animal welfare was the four areas that we looked at.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I suppose an interesting first question, maybe Claire, if you begin, and then I'll come on to Carrie and Derek, is a little bit about what your members, obviously, which is split across both travel agents and tour operators, what they've kind of been focusing on. Obviously, we're coming out of a pandemic. It's a completely unprecedented, sorry to use that word, situation. It's been a strange year. I mean, what have been the sort of priorities of members? Have you found that they've been able to focus on sustainability in these kind of initiatives?
Yeah, and I think I'll just sort of elaborate briefly on sort of Abta's role. So yes, our main focus is working with members on sustainability, but we also promote sustainability destinations, and we also support the industry to engage consumers as well. But yeah, in terms of sort of travel companies, I've sort of seen a few different things. I think one thing that's worth mentioning is, obviously, we've all seen the horrific impact of COVID, particularly on destinations. And a number of travel companies, for example, through their foundations, have been supporting those sort of lost incomes, etc. over the past year. It's a drop in the ocean compared to what's been lost, but it is something, and it has made a tremendous difference to those people that have been supported. But I think, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I think we are seeing, everyone, whether that's travel companies or destinations, having to rethink. And a lot of those people, a lot of those organisations are rethinking with sustainability in mind.
Okay, interesting. Would you agree with that, Derek, from the sort of tour operator perspective?
Yes, I mean, my first thought when you said what have people been doing, I was tempted to say just trying to survive. But when we're talking about sustainable tourism, actually, it has given people, and I'm sure it doesn't just apply to Aito tour operators, but it's given people time to think. Quite often, you run a business and you haven't got the opportunity to just stop and think through what you're doing and why you're doing it. And a lot of our members certainly have been spending the time profitably in ST terms, thinking through what they're going to do. Some of them haven't got the answers yet. I think most people agree travel is going to be a little bit different when things get back to something approaching normality. And so for a lot of our members, this is the time now to think through what the changes will be and how it will affect them. And I think one of the changes that many of our members have noticed is, which is good news for what we're talking about today, an increasing number of members are interested in the ST approach of a company they're potentially going to book a holiday with. Yeah. They want to know, what is planned, which of course means it's we've now got a situation whereby doing the right thing, if I can put it in inverted commas, is not just a question of whether you feel it's the right thing. It's also good business sense, which means that we're getting quite a few members who, if I'm honest, are probably not totally sold on sustainable tourism, but they're beginning to see it is worth their while getting involved. Just before I stop, one big thing that we've done at Aito is it started as a discussion in the bar after one of the sessions at our overseas conferences in 2019. And that was the idea of putting together a think tank, which, surprisingly enough, the next day when everybody had recovered from their glasses of Malbec, it still seemed to be a good idea. And it's now become the Aito Climate Crisis Think Tank, or ACT for short. We didn't do much with it at all in 2020. People were too busy firefighting. But now this is coming together, and we've got, if you like, something of a structure with two committees, the ST committee, which is looking at the micro approach, helping members in terms of ST actions by producing a series of toolkits. And then the ACT, the think tank, which is looking at the macro issues, aviation, in a government, that sort of thing. So this would probably never have got off the ground if it hadn't been for COVID. So that's been an interesting move forward.
Brilliant. It's good to hear. Thank you, Derek, for that. Carrie, obviously coming at things from a slightly different perspective, the sort of aviation viewpoint, although later on we'll come on to sort of how the industry and the sector can work together. Obviously, BA has recently come out with a few announcements around sort of sustainability and its work with sustainable aviation fuel. Sounds like it's not, BA's not kind of had to, take a sidestep from the kind of, responsible tourism efforts in the last year. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you guys have been up to?
Yeah, sure. And I think just as the others have said, the pandemic obviously has been a massive challenge for our business and for the aviation sector as a whole. But I think, much the same as for the rest of the industry, it's just really made us redouble our efforts. And we've seen that both at a kind of broad aviation sector level, where we've seen like our alliances, our industry partners move behind us in terms of committing to net zero emissions. So obviously we came out with our Flight Path Net Zero programme in 2019. But in spring last year, the UK aviation industry backed that with sustainable aviation commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. And then our One World Alliance also joined that. So we're seeing a kind of real kind of coalescence of the aviation sector really recognising the urgency of action for climate. But within BA ourselves, over the last year as well, we're also kind of looking again, taking the opportunity to really look at what we've done over the last 20 years on environment and sustainability and pull that together into a model that really kind of aligns sustainability as part of our core purpose and our business model. And so we've brought together a new sustainability team to help deliver that and to engage across the business. So it's exciting times, really at a pivot point, but very much of the view that sustainability has to be absolutely core to our recovery as we come out of the pandemic.
Yeah, brilliant. And just to sort of touch upon what Derek mentioned earlier, at BA, presumably, has there sort of been a bit of research done probably before the crisis even about consumer sentiment towards sustainability, but also sort of in relation to the pandemic? Do we agree that the post-COVID consumer, if you like, will be more conscious of sort of booking with companies that they feel are taking good strides in this area?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of clear trend that's emerging in society at large at the moment. Is really the pandemic's made everyone realise that if you know about risks and you don't, address them, they can happen. And, climate change, of course, we're seeing evidence of that all around us now. So I think, things have moved forward a lot, as well as kind of individuals being motivated and wanting action. We're seeing this kind of manifest at an investor level as well. So, and in governments with regulators. So I think all of these together are bringing together kind of broad societal energy around this, which is really encouraging.
Mm-hmm. And Derek, you'd mentioned that
I think
before.
I was just going to say, I think COVID has made people appreciate in a way they didn't do before the idea of cleaner air and the whole thing about the natural environment. When you get something in the newspaper about whether it's wildlife or the waters of the sea, people are beginning to appreciate how much nicer it is when congestion isn't striking the streets or affecting things like that. So I think that's been a steady change over the last 12 months. I think people appreciate cleaner air. They appreciate the idea of looking after natural environment probably far more than they did before.
Now, we've actually been measuring consumer attitudes to sustainability as part of our holiday habits research. And actually the 2020 research showed that half of customers consider sustainability to be important or essential, compared to only a fifth sort of back in 2011. And not only that, we found sort of consumer concern for specific issues has, you know, absolutely risen in 2020. But I think the other thing when we think about consumers is just to remember that the evidence shows us that customer satisfaction improves when you measure sustainability as well. So for example, Abta runs Travel Life for Accommodation, which is a sustainability certification for hotels. And we know that sustainably certified hotels have a higher customer satisfaction than other hotels. So I think it's sort of yes, customers are also saying that it's more important, but remembering that when you get this right, customers will be happier anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Derek, this might be one for you. I know that you actually contributed to some TTG content recently, talking a little bit about this, and I know you obviously run your foundation, which you're very welcome to talk about. We've got this interesting time at the moment, haven't we, where we're actually potentially faced with destinations around the world needing people to return to them, and you know, there's obviously this huge lack of tourism, which is impacting people in a different way to what any of us could have expected. Presumably there's got to be quite a lot of considered thought around how we actually do return to, you know, kind of huge mass tourism. Is that something that you've sort of been looking into a little bit?
Yeah, well, you know, the Aito think tank that I've mentioned, you know, is concentrating to some extent on that very question. You know, things are going to change immeasurably, I think, and it's nice, as has been said already, that people are beginning to appreciate what a good sustainable tourism angle to an operator's product can mean. So I think that's all to the good. As I say, I sometimes think that some people are doing it, I'm an old cynic, because it's commercially wise to do it. But frankly, I don't care if that's the reason. So long as they're getting more involved in looking at ST as part of their product, I don't care whether they're doing it through sincerity or because they can make more money. I don't care, as long as they're doing it. You know, and things will go from there. I mean, I think it's encouraging that, I mean, I can illustrate it this way. If you go back 20 years and you ask somebody what the word environment meant, they'd ask for a dictionary. But now, environment is a word that's understood. And we're talking now about, you know, topics which weren't talked about 5 or 10 years ago. And so, although some people think, you know, it's going to be a hard, well, including me, think it's going to be a hard battle to get where we want to get to eventually. The fact that it's even being discussed, the fact that TTG, dare I say it, is running this event that we're recording today, illustrates the fact it's now on people's radar. And I think once it's on people's radar, that's the biggest initial hurdle has been crossed, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it sounds like you'd all agree that perhaps COVID, ironically in a way, has been a bit of a catalyst for this, and we seem to have come out the other side with more focused thought about it all. Claire, I think you mentioned as well, also for TTG recently, about destinations are perhaps working as well themselves in sort of making sure they're prepared, and this idea of just making sure there's a kind of equitable, you know, return to travel. Is there much thought there from Abta on destinations? Have you spoken to them?
Yeah, and when we think about destinations, I mean, we know that the quality of tourism depends on good destination management. And so whether that's ensuring local communities are benefiting, or ensuring that culture and nature are protected, or, you know, increasingly important, you know, ensuring that the destination is resilient to climate change. And these are all things that I'm seeing being addressed, you know, as destinations rethink their strategies in light of COVID. I'm seeing all of these things being addressed in their strategies as well. So it's becoming embedded within just sort of destination management planning.
Mm-hmm.
I would have thought a good example of destinations are beginning to look at things differently would be if you look at Venice. I mean, that's one of the 2 or 3 places that people always talk about when they talk about over-tourism. And I know from having visited a few times that, you know, people who live actually in Venice, in the canals bit, as it were, where all the tourists go, they were fed up with tourists. You know, everywhere was a tourist. You couldn't go and buy much in the way of shopping because it's all bars, cafes and restaurants. And over the last year, I am sure that a lot of the inhabitants of central Venice difference and appreciated the difference when there are markedly less tourists. I mean, that's not the answer, I'm sure, to get rid of tourism completely, but it must emphasize to people who are living in Venice or Dubrovnik or Barcelona or wherever, you know, it's a practical example of how things are nicer when things are managed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think through your foundation, I think you were saying a big tenet of what you like to promote is this idea of consumers giving back to the communities that they visit, and not necessarily just turning up and assuming that, you know, because they're spending money in the local economy, that that's necessarily good for the destination.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of our key points about the foundation that I'm running is I feel that there's a number of tourists who, not because they're bad people, it's not on their radar and they don't think about it. They'll go on, particularly on a venture holiday, going to some country which is still in the developing stage of its infrastructure. And they'll take lots of photographs. They'll eat a lot of food without worrying what that does to the local community. They use all the resources of the local community. And then they go home and they say, well, that was nice. I got some good photographs. But they don't mentally link with or connect to the place they visited. And I would refer to that really as a one-way transaction. It's all take and no give. And I'm pleased, since one of the things that our foundation is trying to do is to get people to understand that you can make it a two-way transaction by getting involved in promoting projects in areas where tourists go. I think it's very important to get people to understand that. Somebody referred to it the other day as circular tourism, and I kind of know what they mean. You know, you go there, you visit, and you eventually give something back. And I think generally, it's not just me, of course, that's saying this, generally tourists, travelers are beginning to understand the idea that it should be a two-way thing and you shouldn't just go and take and not give.
Yeah, brilliant.
That's in it in a sentence.
Yes, and we can come on to sort of marketing and how we can communicate with the consumer a little bit on this later. Moving slightly onto the sort of aviation side of things. I suppose, you know, the topic that has been around for many years is carbon offsetting, which I know in recent years perhaps attracted a bit of criticism. I think some people say it's not going far enough. But obviously a huge amount of the big travel companies do rely on this. I mean, is this something that's changing? Is it something that people are still prioritizing, or is it an important part of the mix of kind of efforts at this point in time before we've progressed further with certain technologies? I don't know who's maybe wants to take that one. Carrie, welcome to.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Yeah, so I mean, the role of carbon offsetting is really vital for aviation and getting to net zero emissions. It's an important stepping stone for us while we kind of scale up the long-term solutions. So we have got a lot of exciting solutions that are in the pipeline, whether it's sustainable aviation fuel or low carbon aircraft, or even carbon capture technology in the long run. In the short term, carbon offsetting is a really crucial opportunity, both for the industry to help compensate our emissions now, but also for nature. So using kind of nature-based solutions, using the financing that can come from aviation to help protect, you know, rare habitats, whether it's rainforest or peatlands or kind of water ecosystems, absolutely vital. So we have actually committed to offsetting all the emissions on our UK domestic flights from the start of last year, using kind of high quality carbon offset projects from a range of different types, from renewables to forestry to forest protection type projects, but all the highest standard, verified and independently certified carbon offset projects. In time, we would see them transitioning to, you know, carbon removals, whether again nature-based or technology-based. But yeah, an exciting opportunity, I think, for all these projects in developing countries. But looking at COP this year, also an opportunity to start building up the rule book to enable carbon offsetting in the UK and in developed nations as well. So I think this is, just the start of what could be a really important global industry and kind of new economics for carbon.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
Clare,
interesting that when carbon offsetting first began to be talked about, sorry, shall I go on? When it was first talked about, a lot of people thought, "Oh, this is fine. I'll get a flight as usual. I'll bung a bit of money into a carbon offsetting scheme, and I've done what I need to do for the planet," which is oversimplifying it. But for me, it was a first step in getting people to even be involved in the topic. And now, of course, we're learning, as Carrie is saying, we're learning a lot more about it. It's a good thing, but it's not the answer to everything. But at least it got people talking, and that, to me, is one of the vital aspects of carbon offsetting. We can educate people, we can make people think a bit more about it as we go along. But it was a great first step to getting people to understand the fact that we need to do something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I think sort of building on sort of both of those points, I think what's key here is transparency. So I think, credibility is important. And I think to be credible, you do need to talk about what real reductions in emissions you can make, and what those reductions will look like will depend on your business model. So that might be, for example, renewable energy in hotels or your offices, electrification of ground transport. We've talked about the innovation and around sort of alternative fuels in flights, or whether that's in cruise. And so I think transparency is key, but I do think for sort of unavoidable emissions, credible offsets can finance some great initiatives as well. Mm-hmm. And offsets are part of the legal framework when we consider sort of aviation, for example. So I think that they're a jigsaw piece, but we do need to look at real emissions reductions as well.
Mm-hmm. I suppose we're on a journey, aren't we? Still, there's no point in pretending that we can just kind of jump to emission-free aircraft. We'll come on to that as well. I was going to ask you about the sort of idea about having a net zero transatlantic flight in due course. But today the government's actually, as you'll all know, pledged £15 million to support innovations that drive the production of sustainable aviation fuels into converting it from everyday waste. Carrie, I know that BA actually announced recently, some further partnerships around this. I think you're developing your own plant, or at least involved in that. So will you be getting involved in this government initiative, or is BA sort of too far along the journey already?
No, not at all. No, we're really supportive of it and really welcome it. So the two plants that we've announced already for sustainable aviation fuel, so just to set the scene and kind of the role that sustainable aviation fuel can play, multiple different pathways of generating sustainable aviation fuel. But what it means generally is that the life cycle emissions can be significantly reduced. And for the two routes that we've currently announced, kind of waste to jet fuel and alcohol to jet fuel, both of those can deliver CO2 reductions of about 70% lower than fossil-based fuels. So that's why we're so interested in them. The other opportunity that they give is they just drop in their direct replacement for kerosene. So all the existing infrastructure means we can continue to use that same aircraft and we can operate as normal. So they're a great solution from that perspective. So the two plants that we've announced our investment in is one in the UK, partnering with Velocys for a plant in Immingham in Humberside. And we're hopeful that that will be able to be on stream and developing producing fuel by 2025. And for that, we'd love to be able to access some of the government funding that has been announced today. We also announced a partnership and an offtake agreement with LanzaJet from their first plant in Georgia in the USA, and that would begin from 2022, with the opportunity then to look beyond that for producing a plant in the UK as well, using that similar technology. So yeah, lots happening, moving really fast, and with the government's Jet Zero Council now kind of putting a lot of governance around this, a lot of effort, and as we heard today, more funding, it's really encouraging that we're seeing the momentum in this accelerate.
I think that's it, because no matter how good the intentions of all the different travel companies, if you don't have that, you need the sort of momentum and the investment, like you say, to get everybody kind of working towards the same goal, because otherwise if it's too fragmented, it just takes too long to get going. So yeah, it sounds like that's quite a positive announcement. Is that something that you've looked at as well today, Claire, the government's announcement around this?
Yeah, and as you say, that kind of Jet Zero Council bringing together industry and government around a shared challenge and a sort of shared vision, that sort of group is something that, Abta alongside others like Sustainable Aviation had been asking for a long time before it happened. So this is exactly what we need, that kind of conversation to sort of increased understanding of what the industry needs to bring about this transition.
Mm-hmm. Carrie, in terms of what BA is working on with these plants, is that I think everybody's got this kind of date of 2050, haven't they, in the diary? Is it something that will evolve even further for BA? I think that there's a lot of talk about synthetic fuels would be the kind of panacea where we're not kind of using waste to generate them. Is that something that's viable, or are you very much focusing on the kind of sustainable aviation fuel at the moment?
So we're looking at multiple pathways for sustainable aviation fuels. Very much focused on the sustainability credentials. So that's one of the things that appeals to us about the waste to jet fuel, is you're basically dealing with two problems at once. So there's lots of waste that is currently shipped from the UK, and we're using waste that can't otherwise be recycled or reused. So waste that was destined for landfill, and we're diverting it into a waste to jet fuel plant. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of helping deal with the landfill issue. And then on the kind of alcohol to jet fuel, again, it's using residues, waste gases or forest residues and other sources of waste, kind of using them effectively. On the power to liquid and the synthetic fuels, yeah, they're really attractive as well for the future. But obviously that first of all relies on having huge quantities of clean energy. So we're looking forward to that as well, and we're very keen to partner with others and exploring options on that too. But that will probably take just a little bit more time for that to come on stream with the volumes of clean electricity that's needed.
Yes, good point. Yes. And I suppose sort of stemming from that, you might all take a view on this. I suppose, Carrie, from an aviation perspective or the wider industry perspective, do you think that there is enough collaboration at this point in time between airlines who might traditionally, be competitors and tour operators, people across the kind of supply chain? Do you think there's a desire there for everybody to work together to make sure that we can kind of start hitting these targets?
I don't think there's enough cooperation as we would like, but that's understandable. We're at the start of this journey. We're at the bottom of the mountain, if you like, and we've got to climb it. And I think it's pretty obvious to all the people who are interested in this topic that we have to work together. I think it'll take a little time, but that's the inevitable route, I think. Mm-hmm. So I'm not too disturbed that at the moment there isn't a lot of cohesion, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I probably have a more positive view than that, because my sense is, over the last decade, we have seen huge collaboration within the aviation sector. So right from 2009, when the aviation sector came together to jointly commit to our 2050 long-term targets and our interim target of carbon neutral growth from 2020. So we've had that decade of collaboration already within the aviation sector. And as you mentioned, the Sustainable Aviation Coalition and others, and our One World Alliance, for example, lots of great work that's happened together that we couldn't have done individually. I think where we need to go now is kind of cross-sector collaboration, and that's where things like Jet Zero Council starts to be effective, but also the opportunity that comes with the COP climate conference this year is trying to look at how we can cross-finance, how we can use sectors like aviation that are complex to decarbonize, that we can help fund carbon reductions elsewhere while we scale up our solutions. And those really do need kind of government support and global scale solutions. So, back to ICAO and trying to get global kind of commitment around a long-term goal for aviation towards net zero would be really helpful too.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because it seems like in some ways the industry is sort of pushing things forward in this regard rather than the government necessarily. Do you think that's the right way around? I suppose obviously you guys will perhaps would favour, being able to sort of lead the conversation rather than necessarily having things imposed by the government. But it's quite an interesting kind of looking at how we're gonna move forward in that way. Claire, I think you guys work with sustainable aviation as well, but also the government on other topics.
I think from sort of the travel industry perspective, when it comes to kind of decarbonising aviation, and this was why we're a member of Sustainable Aviation, because I think it is important that we kind of speak in one voice to some extent to government, because I think, you know, when we know that government support is needed for the transition, and so I think it's very helpful when we can articulate clearly what the asks are of government. And where we think the opportunities are. So that's why from Abta perspective, we've joined Sustainable Aviation, but recognising that within the broader travel and tourism industry, there's other decarbonisation issues as well. So we set all of this out in our Tourism for Good report, but we need to look at decarbonisation in cruise, in hotels, in ground transport. You know, we need to look at the whole travel journey. But yes, so as we talked about that cross-sector collaboration, but I think that shared articulation of what the opportunity is, I think is key.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say when I was talking about, you know, we just started people collaborating, that wasn't, Carrie, a suggestion that the aviation side is not working together. It's more this cross-sector thing that I was referring to, which, you know, which I think is starting. So we've got a good way to go.
Do you think the Jet Zero Council, perhaps though, obviously I think that focuses on perhaps airports and airlines, but I suppose Derek and Claire, do you have a view on how the whole, you know, the wider chain, including these sort of SMEs, can kind of all be talking about this in one forum? I don't know if there's scope, or whether, you know, some kind of there is already a forum for that. I don't know. Does Abta facilitate anything like that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the things we try to do with Tourism for Good is kind of look at decarbonisation across the whole of travel and tourism and bring to life what it means. So within our membership, we have so many different business models. We have, you know, agents, or, you know, people that, particularly with home working, it's actually very hard to say, well, what are the emissions that they are responsible for? Because it's somewhat, you know, it's people in their own bedrooms. To, you know, the big tour operators that have their own cruise ships, that have their own planes. So we've got a huge range of business models. So what it looks like in practice will be different dependent on that business model. But I think amongst our membership and amongst that travel industry, we can certainly play a role in sort of painting what that picture can look like, what we're aiming for, and how we can learn from each other. And also, I think the first step that I think a lot of companies are struggling with is measurement. And so I think we can support companies on measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask a little bit about sort of how we talk to the consumer. Well, I suppose there's two levels. There's how suppliers can perhaps talk to sort of intermediaries a bit better, but also how we can talk to clients and communicate, you know, the kind of sustainable, well, the need really in terms in this regard. You said that perhaps consumers are a bit more poised to be, you know, to listen at the moment post-COVID. Is that something that, you know, we need to look at developing further? Is this an opportunity now to do that? Carrie, I don't know if there's much sort of specific marketing going on at BA to kind of get this message over to consumers, or is it more of a thing that you're working on in the background and until you're sort of more ready to talk about? Sorry, it's quite a lot of questions in one question.
Yeah, no, definitely. You know, it's a really important channel for communication, and so we're looking at lots of different opportunities within that just now. So it's really interesting. I think particularly in the last year during the pandemic, we've seen a lot of our corporate customers have been reaching out to us, asking for help, more information about their carbon footprint, about how they can communicate with their employees on sustainable travel. And so we're looking at how we engage with them. We've been sharing a lot of details about our own sustainability programme, and kind of looking to collaborate and support them in achieving their goals. But also for us then with our direct customers, so we already have our kind of carbon offsetting site with Pure Leapfrog, which is for carbon zero. So for passengers who want to offset their emissions, they can connect through that and find out more about carbon offsetting projects. But we're looking more this year kind of at rolling out on the back of our new strategy, which is covering, you know, kind of people, climate, resources, communities and customers, looking really at engaging more directly with our customers on all the elements of sustainability that we're working on. So yeah, I think it's lots to come in that area.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's interesting that when it comes to, I'll use the word educating, I suppose, people about just what is involved in this topic. Tour operators, in my view, are sort of not piggy in the middle, but they're in the middle in that they have to influence their DMCs, their ground handling agents, and in some countries, the ground handling agents are on a par with the tour operators. They believe in sustainable tourism. In other countries, they don't even know what the word means. So quite often, a tour operator, if they're the sort of tour operator I would appreciate, they will be trying to teach their DMCs what we're talking about here. But at the same time, the tour operator is also dealing with their consumers and catering for increased demand. So the tour operator is kind of working in two different directions. You can't fully provide what some consumers want if your ground handling agents don't understand what we're talking about, because the product will just not be the way it should be. So we got two battles to fight as a tour operator.
Yeah. And that question, Jennifer, that you asked about agents, I think that's critical, and this is an important focus for us at Abta, because agents can play a role in kind of profiling best practice. So, for example, Abta, we run Travel Life Accommodation, this sustainability certification, and so a number of agents will highlight Travel Life hotels in their brochures and websites. And as tour operators, more and more tour operators are embracing sustainability, there's more opportunity there for agents to profile that good practice. So I think now is the time that we can grow that agent expertise in terms of understanding what sustainability is and sort of how to communicate the benefits to customers. And actually we have advice for operators and agents on terms of how to communicate with customers. And I think some of the main points are, the first thing is make it specific, tell a story. So how does that excursion benefit local people, or how is nature benefiting from that initiative? And then the second thing is tying it into how it improves the customer experience. So kind of tying into what I was saying before, how customers will have a better holiday. So how that bike trip will help them see the local area as well as being low carbon, or how that talk about that great tasting, authentic, freshly grown local food, for example, that's also supporting the local economy. So it's about, being specific and tying into that improved customer experience.
Mm-hmm.
I know when going back a couple of decades, I'm afraid now, when I used to run Explore, at that time we found it was a bit of a problem. We didn't sell to a lot of travel agents, but the ones who did sell to, quite a lot of them were not buying into the ethos that we were trying to put across. They wanted the commission about it. Whereas now it's changed, and the good agents are fully on board now as to what we're trying to do. I think that's a sea change and a very important one.
And as you said earlier, Derek, I suppose regardless of whether people and agents and everyone in the chain wants to be on board with this, I think as the kind of business imperative just becomes more and more apparent, it's just going to become part of life, isn't it, and part of the business model. So
Precisely.
It won't really be a question anymore of the good agents wanting to do it, but more a case of everybody has to do it, which is not a bad byproduct, I suppose. So in answer to the question, obviously very, very far reaching, but can we rebuild as a more sustainable sector? If I perhaps just come to each of you, if you could try and succinctly say a little bit about what you think there in terms of opportunities, but also challenges in the next few years around this. Claire, I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, of course. And so we have sort of tried to pull this all together we've effectively tried to create a roadmap for how we can embed sustainability into the recovery, and that roadmap is tourism for good. And so we look at what, reminding ourselves what the benefit of tourism is, because I think that is important. Why we're doing this, who is benefiting, what the challenges we need to address, so the environment, destination management, human rights and animal welfare, and then what exactly does that mean? What does that look like for travel companies, for destinations, for consumers, and how we can work together to achieve it. So it's an exciting time for the industry, and I think we have a clear idea of what we can move towards. So we just need to make it happen.
Okay, brilliant. Derek, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've touched on a couple of points earlier. I think the consumer's got a lot more time to think. And I think also there is a feeling amongst many people, the very fact that maybe friends have died or friends have been ill with COVID-19. It's a bit of a cliche, but you know, it's making people realise that life isn't forever, and just people are appreciating what the world is all about, the natural world is all about, and I think we have to capitalise on that. And I think people are more interested in thinking about the world that they are shortly going to start travelling in than they were before. Of course, I'm simplifying it because if I can just, and I know it's a bit of a crude way of doing it, if I can split the market into two, you've got the mass market mainstream holidays, which consists of getting on a plane, going to a beach in Spain somewhere, sunbathing, and coming home. I think it's a whole difficult job to convince those people what we're talking about. Whereas the specialist operators, I think, find it easier because of the nature of the clients that they're dealing with. So the degree to which the travel industry, well, the tour operating side of the travel industry, will buy into the stuff we're talking about today, I think depends very much on the model of the operator. And I think the big challenge is to get mainstream tourism as involved, or as get them to get their clients to believe in that, believe in sustainable tourism to the same degree as the consumers of specialist travel agents. It's a bit of a crude definition, but I think it's important to understand it's not just one journey. We've got 2 or 3 parallel journeys going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of them are already sort of, like you say, more engaged than others, and there'll be more work to do in other areas. Carrie, again, difficult question, but sort of, yes, do you believe that we can rebuild as a more sustainable sector post-COVID?
Yeah, we can and we must. So I think what you'll see really for aviation is, well, from our perspective, certainly, is continued focus on the short-term actions. So the real focus on operational efficiency, on adopting new aircraft into our fleet. So current aircraft are between 25 and 40% more fuel efficient than the aircraft that they're replacing right here and now. So you see more of that, like our early retirement of the 747s, for example. We're adopting electric ground fleet. So our pushback tugs are now electric at Heathrow, and more and more electric vehicles in our fleet as well. So doing everything that we can here and now, including carbon offsetting our UK domestic emissions, and then continued focus and investment to scale up the solutions for the longer term. So working with governments and with others, and where we can, to bring forward the technology solutions for sustainable aviation fuel or for low carbon aircraft, whether it's like our partnership with Zero Avia on hydrogen aircraft of the future, and also on carbon capture technology and nature-based carbon removals. All of that just needs to be part of the mix and kind of consolidated effort really across all of those areas, and that's what we're working on now.
So I suppose that answers the question of whether we will see. I know that Boris Johnson is keen for us to create an emission-free transatlantic aircraft. So you think that is possible in the future, but perhaps it'll be as part of a bit of a mix. It might include a little bit of offsetting and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the Fly Zero program is focused on an actual, zero emission aircraft. Yeah, personally, I really want to see that happen. It's like my personal goal. I want to see that happen before I retire. So yeah, I really hope everyone gets behind it.
Yeah, well, here's hoping. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That's been a really interesting conversation, and I'm sure this will be the first of many conversations around responsible tourism. As you can say, we could have a different discussion on all the different strands, multiple at that. So thanks very much for kind of succinctly weaving in some of the key areas, and hopefully that's provided some pause for thought for some of our viewers. And thank you very much, everybody. We'll speak to you soon.